Lawyers, have you ever done a case you secretly hoped you would lose? And why? I worked at a civil litigation firm right out of law school. Nothing fancy, mostly property disputes, contract enforcement, debt recovery, and the occasional injury case that didn't involve a car crash. The work was steady, the partners were decent, and I was drowning in student debt, so I didn't ask too many questions about where the money came from. One of our biggest clients for a stretch was this real estate investor. Let's call him Doug. Doug was a regular feature in our office. Loud voice, shiny suit, a Bluetooth earpiece always in his ear even when it wasn't connected to anything. The kind of guy who liked to say things like, always be closing, or you gotta spend money to take money. I hated him from the jump. Doug's whole business model revolved around what he called distressed properties. In reality, he'd scoop up foreclosed, often unlivable homes at auction. Places that had been gutted, roofs caving in, mold in the walls, utilities long shut off. Then he'd flip them as is to desperate people, folks with no credit, immigrants, single parents, people with no other shot at home ownership. He didn't sell them outright. He'd finance them himself through these installment purchase agreements that were basically just long-term leases dressed up to look like a mortgage. The buyer would move in, pour their own money, and labor into fixing the place up. New flooring, plumbing, wiring, all of it, thinking they were working toward owning the house. Then, once the place had some real value, Doug would start combing through the paperwork. One missed payment, one insurance lapse, one zoning issue, and boom, he'd file for default. And because the contract was structured in his favor 6 ways from Sunday, he could reclaim the property, keep all the equity, and resell it for more. It was disgusting. He was good at it too. By the time we started seeing pushback in the form of lawsuits, he'd already done this to at least a dozen families that we knew about. We were brought in to defend him. That was my job. First as a junior associate, then taking lead on a few cases myself. I felt like garbage every time I filed a motion. He'd sit in meetings bragging about how he was flipping the flippers or cleaning up the neighborhood and teaching people how contracts work. I'd sit across from women in depositions, crying, showing us photos of their kids' bedrooms they'd built with their own hands, and then go back to the office and draft summary judgment briefs to kick them out of their homes. It wore on me. I wasn't even that idealistic coming out of law school, but this was different. I couldn't sleep after some of the hearings. I started missing deadlines on purpose. I buried evidence I wasn't legally required to disclose. I made arguments so weak even the judge side-eyed me. In one case, I flat out hoped we'd lose. I didn't throw it. I wouldn't go that far, but I didn't put up much of a fight either. We lost that one, and the partner gave me a hard time for it. But Doug, he was more upset about the damage to his brand, said we'd made him look bad, and that he wanted us to appeal immediately. The partner told him no. He hadn't paid us in months anyway. That was the beginning of the end. Turns out Doug's empire was funded by a mess of high-interest business loans and personal guarantees he never intended to honor. The firm dropped him when we realized he was in arrears to 3 different offices and had stiffed one of our paralegals on travel reimbursements. The partner said it wasn't worth the risk anymore. I almost clapped. Last I heard, he was facing a couple of fraud claims and a class action from some of the families he'd burned. I don't know if anything stuck. Guys like Doug are slippery. They reinvent themselves every 6 months and pop back up somewhere else with a new LLC and a slightly different name. But I hope he got buried. I stuck around the firm for another year or so until I got a public interest job that paid half as much but let me sleep through the night. I think about those cases sometimes. The houses, the families, the ones we managed to delay, and the ones we outright steamrolled. There's a plaque in that old office lobby that says, "Justice is the first virtue of those who govern." Doug used to laugh every time he walked past it. I don't think I'll ever forget that sound. Edit, finding an excuse absolutely encompasses fabricating an excuse.